My name is Sara Bjelke and I'm an architect and I'm a partner in Urban Power.
My name is Arne Cermak Nielsen. I'm one of the founders of Urban Power.
We have some very interesting projects at the moment. We're working on a big extension of Copenhagen into 9 small islands south of Copenhagen. So it's a master plan and a visionary project.
The turning point was probably when I studied abroad and found out that architecture and planning is a language that works in all cultures. Although you might not know the language, then you have a lot of things in common because you can express development and ideas and thoughts through illustrations and drawings. And then again, you could say rules, laws, possibilities are different from different countries, but a lot of the thoughts and the goals are the same, no matter which culture you represent. We're mostly known for linking the gap between the master plan scale and the building scale. So we include urban planning, urban space and buildings as a unity. Well, we specialize in adding value when we solve the different issues in the project. That could be, for instance, climate adaptation as a natural part of planning. It could also be activating spaces or making sure that there's a good link between urban planning on one side, urban space and then buildings, future buildings.
We work with urban transformation, so large-scale urban developments in primarily existing cities. So our focus is very much on how the city relates to the urban spaces and to the buildings. So having this transition as a focus point of our designs. So when we work with these large-scale urban projects, we often work with climate adaptation, so protection from rainwater and the rise of the seas, but we also very much work with the urban life.
In terms of urban planning, the way that people interact with each other or don't interact is really important. We might have or had a tendency of planning ghettos, both for wealthy and not so wealthy people. And I think there's a huge focus now on trying to avoid that. And that's, of course, in one sense, a political operation, but it's the role of the planners are really important as well.
Maybe I'd rather say, when did we decide to create our own company? Because it was very much this that traditionally architects only work with the buildings and are not always connecting as well to the city and the development of the city. So we saw this potential of working with how the city relates to the urban spaces and the architecture. So having this connection. I never really knew that I wanted to be an architect, but I always knew that I wanted to do something creative. And I'm also very much into science, so somehow the building industry and the architecture business was kind of combining this creativity with the science. It was just a matter of the creative and the mathematical parts melting together in one way of working, which was very interesting. Also that you create something, you help building up society. It's very inspiring to work with. I think there's a much more focus now on the area that I work with, the urban scale, and how to create the life in the city, and also how to involve the public in developing the city and the buildings. So it's much more about the social values and co-creation, you could say, and dialogue in the business. Mm. Most of our projects come through network. So we have a big network in the business for developers, contractors, municipalities. The public sector is a big part of our clients. So of course also these tenders where we get the notification and then you have to apply is a big part of how to get the projects. So we often go out to, for example, the municipalities and say, hey, what's going on in your municipality at the moment? And then we have a discussion on the different development sites in the municipality, and sometimes we can hook up investors and developers and create a project, and sometimes the municipality themselves wants us to take a look at an area and see what can we do with this area.
Yeah, that's hard to say. I think word of mouth is one thing, but it's probably also to be on the right place on the right time and that you can't always plan. So being open and finding opportunities and follow the debate and the news is a quite important thing, I think, in order to find your spot.
Well, word of mouth is many things. You can say it's just person to person, but it also is a PR strategy. We like to go very public with our projects and tell about it, and also make these proactive projects, which has an interest from the society point of view. So in that way, we take part in the public debate a lot with these type of projects, and in that way we go quite far, you could say, PR-wise.
Planning is a very public matter. You could say everyone has an opinion about that. And luckily, I would say there's also way more public interest in planning, and that's super important because what is planned is something which is both political, public, and environmental and economical issues. So you could say everyone has a part in it, and I think that makes this business extremely interesting.
It depends very much on if the client contacts us because they already have an assignment, then maybe 1 month or so. But if it's more like a networking, we get to know a potential client and we have a dialogue, it can be, years maybe. So depending on like when there'll be a project, right?
Well, it depends a lot. If it's a competition or a given assignment, then normally things are arranged and it might take a month or something before you agree on the conditions. If it's more like an open question, then it can take years of negotiation and trying to get closer to the goal. So we're doing both these more short-term organized way of working, and then we also have these long-term projects where you need to have a lot of patience. Being there is the most important. So I would say going there, meet the client or meet the potential client is the most important, because that's the only way you can really understand the needs and see if you have anything in common that could be a cooperation in the future. Otherwise, we call people and write them, of course.
I think we're quite traditional in that way. Phone, email, sometimes is SMS if it's crazy. So, yeah. Well, we follow the news basically, both the news from the industry, but of course also we always try to relate it to the current political situation and what's going on in the society in general. I think we always prioritize to have a good dialogue with the client, and it's very different from client to client. Some clients know very specifically what they want. Some other clients needs to be guided a bit more, and then we propose a process on how to continue with the project. Also, when we start up the project, we always do a thorough analysis, and that means that all our design, all the decisions we take has a base in this analysis, which makes it very easy for the client to understand why the design goes in this direction, because there's a reason from the analysis. Primarily we do meetings, because then you can also look at maps or drawings and explain and draw. That's very much how we work with and sometimes also workshops if it's a client who wants to be involved more in which way the project goes.
Well, we are mainly a business-to-business company, so if we get offers for an apartment that needs to be refurbished or something, then it's not our field, so we don't go for that. But we don't turn work down very often. But if it's not part of our focus, then we're not the right ones for the job.
Now working with the city and the urban development, it's very much just about, walking around, experience how the city functions, both in Denmark, but also getting inspiration from how they do projects in foreign countries. There's very difference in tradition on housing and urban spaces and traffic solutions and all these things. So we sometimes grab something here and there from around the world and say, hey, this could work in this context, and we can try something new in Denmark with a new type of housing or something like that. I lived in Holland for 2 years. And I also lived in the United States for 1 year. So of course I have a much better feeling of how the cities and housing projects work there. But I think also some of the Asian cities are quite inspiring in some of these very dense environments and how to create life in these extremely dense environments.
I would say we get a lot of inspiration from traveling, for being around and see how things are done in other countries. That's a huge important thing. I would also say the international contribution we get from the architects and interns that we have here is also a big inspiration.
I think when you're being specialized as a company, it's very easy to have a profile which the client understands or can relate to, and in that way it can be easier to getting assignments like that because you're an expert on the field. On the other hand, of course, you get very much going in one direction, so it can be difficult to grow into other types of projects. It doesn't need to be hard, but of course when you are specialized in one thing, it's also because you have some great competences in this area and you like to work with this area.
You can say sometimes it's healthy that architects don't only stick to a specific agenda or a specific type of buildings. It's actually quite good that people or architects that specialize in residential buildings sometimes try to do a public building, for instance, because otherwise you quite often get too much repetition and we say, resolve the project in the same way. So if we want more diversity, then I think it's good that you also shift business or shift focus now and then.
Well, a lot of the creativity and a lot of the value is created in the very first phases when you're having the sketch design. And unfortunately, this is maybe also the part which clients have the hardest time seeing that there's an actual value there. So, you know, they like to pay for all the detailed drawings and all the technical stuff, but the more creative part, where it's actually the most important part of the project, I would say, it can be difficult to create a business case on these phases.
A lot of the needs are not necessarily expressed in a tender. It's also not necessarily a competition. It could also be smaller needs or investigations that can lead to a project later on, and that is not announced. That's something you have to be a part of yourself. You could say the proactive way to contribute to the debate is a way of saying that architecture and planning can be a part of the solution, and sometimes you need to find the needs and come with an answer or a vision in order to be a part of that debate. And that's why we do the proactive projects now and then. You see, a lot of the value is created early in the process, but the fee is something which comes very late in the process. And you can say planning is really a crucial point that your buildings or the build mass succeed. If there's no planning or there's very little planning or no considerations at all, then it's harder to make the building succeed. So I think this connection between the importance of the urban scale, the urban space and the building is extremely important.
I think it's inspiring to do competitions. I like the format, and I think also we keep our team sharp and motivated, because in competitions you can do anything and you can overdo yourself, you can say, because you want to become the best, right? So that in that case it's very motivating, but of course it's also, when you're not the winner and you spend a lot of time, it's also quite frustrating.
Well, competitions is a great way to, broaden the perspective on a given assignment. It also, in the best case, it also involves the public more to see the kind of opportunities you have to solve something, and it can also be a way of, being sharp as an office, giving the right answer to the question. At the other hand, you don't have the dialogue with the client. That can sometimes also be a problem. So you have to guess what's important here. Maybe they write a lot of things, but you can't really see who writes what and what's the most important. You have to find out about that yourself.
Working with urban development, we are often working with this term called smart cities, which is very much has to do with the big data, how to control traffic lights or parking infrastructure or optimizing resources and things like that. So I think it becomes a bigger part of the urban development. Well, I think that the industry will be more sufficient in the future. So it's much more directly from the computer to the actually realizing the buildings and the projects. So with computer technologies and everything, there's going to be much more information about the projects, which you can translate more directly into the actually realization. I could also mention something which, for example, now that we are working with urban development, it's not specifically about our industry, but the self-driving cars, for example, are gonna change our urban layout completely when you can, place parking wherever you want because the car can go there itself. So it's a completely another way of creating city in the future. When we work with urban planning, it's very much about, the infrastructure, for example, that you do dense development around the public transportation, so you can have more people living close to the train line, for example, so it's easier to get around without a car. Also making good infrastructure for bikes, so you can keep healthy and also save the environment for all this CO2 from the cars. So to nudging people, you could say, into not using the cars much. That's a big part of the planning, like for example, putting the parking spaces a little bit further away, so it becomes more attractive to use the bike, for example.
Hopefully big data can be a way of creating more efficiency, both in terms of being more accurate in the needs, not over-dimensioning things, buildings, infrastructure, but being more accurate on the actual needs. And that's also hopefully what can solve a lot of the environmental issues that the building industry has. You can say quite often in the industry you do things on experience, and the experience comes from the past. So it's quite hard to guess what will happen in the future, but big data might be something that can point in the right direction of the actual needs. I hope that architecture and planning will be keep the role within the public interest and be a bigger part of the public debate. I think that's the way it's going. There's more and more interest around it, and I think it will only get bigger in the future. I believe there's way more focus on the way that planning and architecture can contribute to the development of the society, and that is not only focused on objects, but it's more a coherent thing that has to do with other disciplines as well. So going from, how can you say, thinking building as an isolated entity, then it's a part of a bigger thing, of a planning. That also goes for environmental issues. When buildings and the building industry takes up 40% of the CO2 emissions, for instance, then I think the only way we can solve that is to work together way better than we do today. There's a tendency that architects think that a nation is, how can you say, kind of like a boundary. There's a difference on how we do things here, how you do it in Sweden, how you do it in Europe and the world. And that's true for a certain extent, but I think we are heading towards a more international world, also in terms of planning, in terms of learning and understanding from the different kind of conditions you have in other nations. And I think in the future you'll see that there will be way more collaborations internationally, and you will see planners also working in other areas than just the national one. The good thing is that there's a lot of attention on environmental issues as an integrated part, not only of buildings but also the planning. I find that extremely important. We invest a lot of money, and a huge part of our economy is based around new development and new buildings. And it's really important that architects and planners are part of the solution and can use that investment also to improve or reduce, how can you say, the impact on the environment. Climate adaptation is is especially or is one of the fields that are getting more and more important in planning and landscaping. Where you could say early on it was purely a technical thing, but now more and more cities found out that they can actually gain from using architects and planners to integrate it in the way that the city develops. Gives new opportunities to make visible solutions and solutions that people are aware of, and they're aware of the environmental impact in their cities and the opportunities that, for instance, a new green area that can adopt rainwater or barriers towards stormwater that can create new recreative parts in the city.